Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on maximizing the uptake of breakthrough medicines across Canada. My name is Marcel Saunier. I'm an associate with Santis Health. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And our plan today is to walk you through some exciting work that's happening at Santis and beyond. And to zero in on CAR T-cell therapy as a case study. We have three esteemed guests that will help us unpack some of the lessons learned and future considerations as these therapies become more widely available. Before we start, just a few housekeeping notes. Firstly, there will be some time for Q&A at the end, towards the end of the hour. So if you have a question, please feel free to submit it through the Q&A function at any time. You can do that as the initial presentation and discussion is unfolding. Secondly, we have some slides that we'll be presenting, and so those slides and the recording of the webinar will be sent to you via email, so you can look at it after if you need to refer back to the conversation. And lastly, we'd appreciate if you would take a few minutes to complete a survey that will be sent to you after the session this afternoon. So thank you in advance for that. Okay, so I want to start by giving you a bit of background on an exciting new initiative underway called I2U. I2U, or Idea to Utilization, is an initiative to offer health system leaders across Canada the knowledge, the support, the information they need to be better prepared to capture the full value of breakthrough medicines that emerge from world-class biomedical research. With foundational funding provided by Novartis, Santis Health is leading this collaborative mechanism that is guided by an independent advisory board of experts in health system performance, technology utilization, and knowledge translation. Next slide. Yes, thank you. So there are lots of issues that an initiative like this could address, but we wanted to focus in an area that was somewhat novel and would add value to stakeholders. And the reality is that despite many important scientific discoveries and technological advances, Canadian healthcare systems still struggle to incorporate breakthrough drugs into patient care and clinical practice, and to do so efficiently and effectively. That makes it harder to capture the full value of these medicines. Although the steps from regulatory approval to reimbursement are defined and highly structured, well-established processes, we know them well, the launch of new drugs into the market after reimbursement frequently differs across provinces, hospitals, and clinicians. And so the key insight of this particular initiative, I2U, is to focus on maximizing the value of breakthrough drugs by optimizing implementation after decisions on reimbursement have been made. So that's a really important focal point of this initiative. As I mentioned, there is an independent advisory board that has been created to guide the work of this project. You see the members of the advisory board in front of you. They cover a broad cross-section of perspectives in the health system. Three of the members are here today, myself bringing a bit of a national and federal perspective, Martine Elias, who brings a patient perspective, and Graham Statt, who brings a payer perspective as a former provincial drug plan manager. And they'll be here to contribute to the conversation, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves a bit more in a moment. Just wanted to also mention the other members of the panel, of the advisory board, sorry, Dr. Sean Chugg, who is a medical director of solutions at Trillium Health Partners, Zaina Tayat, VP of Client Success and Growth at Teladoc Health, Helen Stevenson, who is founder and CEO of the Reformulary Group, and Dr. Robin Tamblin, who is professor of medicine and medical science at McGill and the former scientific director of the Institute for Health Services and Policy Research at the CIHR. So there you have the full advisory board membership in front of you. And as I mentioned, we have a subset of the group here today with an additional guest, and I would like to ask them each to briefly present themselves, introduce themselves, and tell us why they care so much about this particular issue of the implementation challenges around breakthrough drugs and the focus of the conversation today. So I will start with Martine.
Yes, merci beaucoup, Marcel. So my name is Martine Elias. I'm the Executive Director of Myeloma Canada. We are a grassroots patient organization that is national, and we focus on education, awareness, advocacy, science and research, and empowerment in our patient community. And why this is important to me is I represent the end road of what is innovation. It's patients who are benefiting from new innovation. And that's what attracted me to I2U, is bringing that patient voice and also the caliber of the people on the steering committee. Thank you.
Okay, merci Martine. Skipping over out to the West Coast, or at least BC, Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Marcel, and hello, everybody. I'm currently the Chief Administrative Officer for the beautiful district of Summerland in BC's sunny South Okanagan. But before my time in local government, I was with the province of Alberta for almost 2 decades, serving in 5 different ministries. During that time, 3 of them I held ADM portfolios. And one of those portfolios was in health. And I was there for about 3 years in the Ministry of Health in Alberta, whereas responsible for not only Alberta's drug formulary, but also the drug specialty programs, the Alberta Healthcare Insurance Program, compensation of doctors throughout the province. And also during that time, I was the vice chair of the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, and also spent about a year as the incident commander for COVID-19 in Alberta. And so why I'm involved, I guess I'd just say from my experience and perhaps observation working in the system, perhaps naturally due to the need to ensure public safety and the increasing cost of drugs, we've seen the system evolve into one that is sequential, one that is really designed to reduce or eliminate risks, and ultimately focus on price as the key element of value. And what's happening right now with these breakthrough therapies is it's really causing us to rethink how we process those through the system. And of course, as a public payer, budget's always on your mind, and you can't fund everything at any cost. That actually do more harm than good to the system. But we really do want to make sure that the very best therapies are being able to be accessed by the patient community, and to do so as quickly as possible in that regard. It's not just about listing, it's also about providing that true access and the system being responsive in that regard. So I guess I'm involved in this project because it gets us ready for the next wave of innovation that is coming. And needless to say, I am humbled to be involved in a project with such a talented group of board members, and all of us bring our own different perspectives.
Okay, thank you so much, Graham. And last but not least, Caroline Berber, who is bringing a Novartis perspective. As you know, Novartis is a foundational funder of this initiative, so really fortunate to have her with us. Caroline.
Merci, Marcel. Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everybody. So, yeah, my name is Caroline Barber. So I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs and Government Relations at Novartis Canada. We're super happy to be part of this panel today, and really the catalyst of that super important drug, like Martine and Graham and Marcel mentioned. It's one thing to get to reimbursement, but it's another thing to ensure that there is utilization of these innovation. So we're very, very proud of at Novartis to be the catalyst of this work. And also, as a company, it's important to be part of the solution, right? To bring idea, to ensure that we work with the system. So very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Okay, merci, Caroline.
Bienvenue.
Okay, so back to the I2U initiative, just before we dive into CAR T cell therapy, I just wanted to give you a sense of the work that is unfolding. We have chosen to look at 3 case studies to start with, and we've chosen these case studies to be both backward-looking and forward-looking, and addressing multiple implementation challenges as a collective. And so that's why we have chosen CAR T therapy as a really significant system challenge, and we'll talk a lot about CAR T during the conversation today. We've also been looking at Luxturna, which is a gene therapy for retinal disease that has been approved and is rolling out in different parts of the country. And then lastly, Leqembi, which is a forward-looking case study looking at an up-and-coming drug for Alzheimer's that is now under review by Health Canada, has been reviewed by the FDA, has some significant implementation challenges in terms of capacity for imaging, and of course is addressing a need that is very broad in the population. So it's going to be a very interesting area to focus on. So those are the 3 case studies that we are looking at. And let me now just spend a couple of minutes on CAR T therapy, just to give you a bit of a level set on how that new therapy has been introduced in Canada, what it's about. So firstly, CAR T therapy is a type of cell therapy that re-engineers a patient's T cells to provide a personalized targeted treatment to fight cancer. There are several commercially available CAR T therapies designed to treat blood cancers, including leukemia, lymphoma, and multiple myeloma. And CAR T therapy is highly personalized, therefore requires significant infrastructure for T cell extraction, for manufacturing facilities, for T cell engineering, as well as capacity for delivery through hospitals and other treatment facilities. And unlike many therapeutics, it can't be delivered through traditional community-based pharmacies. So I think, with that description, you can see why this presents some really important challenges for health systems. Moving on to the way this is rolled out across Canada. Here you see a bit of a timeline. It's happened very quickly over the last 5 years or so. You see in 2018, the first CAR T therapy received a notice of compliance with conditions from Health Canada. In 2019, Ontario and Quebec approved funding for the first CAR T therapy treatment sites. Then I missed the CAR T therapy receiving the positive recommendation from Canada, which was a really important piece. Alberta then followed in 2020 with the funding of its first CAR T therapy site. And then we are now in 2021, 22, 23. We're seeing more CAR T therapies receiving notices of compliance and Canada's recommendations. We have Nova Scotia having opened its first treatment site. So things are really starting to move. And as of today, we have 4 commercial CAR T therapies that have been approved by Health Canada and CADA. So that's quite a bit of progress in a very short period of time. Okay, so then in terms of the challenges that CAR T therapy presents for health systems, first, there is the need for administrative infrastructure. CAR T therapy requires infrastructure for referral, for screening, for evaluating patients. And this includes manufacturer accredited sites with accredited staff. And there's a disparity of distribution of treatment centers across Canada, creating a challenge of access for certain patients that need to travel from one jurisdiction to another. Secondly, in terms of manufacturing capabilities, in Canada, commercial CAR T cell manufacturing is completed by the parent pharmaceutical companies of branded CAR T therapies, with facilities located in the US. And this means that cells must be shipped to and from the country. Canada has been developing in-house CAR T manufacturing through the clinical trials, but there is more progress to be made before these reach a comparable degree of efficacy and utility to commercially available therapies. And then the other two major challenges are around cold chain management infrastructure and capacity for post-infusion care. For cold chain, like many cell and gene therapies, CAR T cells must be cryopreserved at or below 120 degrees Celsius and remain frozen until the patient is ready to receive treatment. And this is an essential step to ensure safe delivery of the therapy. And lastly, capacity for post-infusion care. Patients must be monitored closely after receiving treatment due to the risk of severe adverse events that can require intensive care. There is not a lot of data on the rate of these events, so treatment centers must estimate patient volumes and have the capacity for potential inpatient admission. So there you have a bit of an overall view of the issue of CAR T. We see here in front of you the website for I2U if you want to learn a bit more about what I2U is up to and would like to be involved. So please feel free to log into that website. At this point, we will start the panel discussion and open up with the first question for our panelists. And this one is more about like what perspective are you bringing to the conversation? Why do you care about this issue? I think we heard a little bit about that previously in the introductions. I think the first real issue that we need to focus on is what are the most significant implementation challenges that impede access to CAR T therapies? And so I would like to start there with Martine.
Thank you, Marcel. I guess there are many issues. You've listed many of the barriers that, or the challenges, because they're not really barriers, because you would always overcome those challenges. Infrastructure is something not new in our healthcare system. Neither is the manufacturing of some of these complicated innovation. Cold chain is not new either. And, capacity or post-treatment is something that's probably newer when you think about CAR T. But you look at the dates that you presented. The first CAR T was approved in 2018. That's 5 years ago. And, we should be in a much better place right now because we're just seeing some provinces come on board with their program for CAR T. Thinking of Saskatchewan, for example, have just come on board. And BC, just very recently, a big province, one of the top 4s in Canada, have just put in place their own infrastructure for CAR T. And not that patients were not getting CAR Ts before, but they were being shipped to the US, and obviously at a cost to the patients and a cost to the family, a cost to the healthcare system. And the same was happening too in Saskatchewan. I think everybody's seen the story of the man who had to leave his home and had to go to Toronto with nobody to help him, and was in a strange place in a strange hospital. So you think about those and you go, well, that should not be happening in the Canadian healthcare system. We have the science, we've got the professionals, we've got high qualified physicians, technicians, centers and manufacturing process that can make this happen a lot more quickly. I guess where I come in representing the myeloma community is like, we just have our first CAR T that's been approved by Health Canada, recommended by CADITH, and is now currently under negotiation. And what I'm hearing is that it's going to take a year or maybe up to 2 years before patients can get access to this CAR T in their own center. And that doesn't make sense to me. We've been starting and doing this and getting the provinces ready and getting the systems and the process back since 2018. So that to me is a big challenge, and it's not something that, you know, our patients like to hear and want to hear. We should not be in this position. Yes, we can argue we've had a pandemic in all of this that probably has created, you know, a lot of strain and pressure on healthcare resources. I know, speaking to some physicians in Toronto, for example, at PMH, one of the reasons why they could be struggling or bringing these therapies to patients is the lack of personnel. A lot of, you know, sort of trained technicians, technical nurses have left or have left the profession. We're burnt out, and resources are sort of assigned to areas of greater need. So, you know, provinces and health systems need to take a look and, you know, address these issues. We were able to respond really quickly, and, you know, everybody was hands on deck during COVID. I think we could do the same, especially when you talk about innovations that are so tremendous from a patient perspective. I mean, you know, in leukemias, it's curative. In lymphomas, it's almost curative, pretty close to it. In myeloma, I mean, we're seeing data that's never been seen in myeloma patients in terms of survival after, you know, 4 and 5 and 6 lines of therapy. So we need to overcome these challenges very quickly because patients are dying.
That's what it's all about, the patients, for sure. And the challenges are legion, and particularly, you know, I think you mentioned the health system being really stretched, you know, post-pandemic. I'm sure that's a big consideration for system decision makers as well going forward. Graham, you've seen this CAR T cell therapy introduction play out in your previous vantage point. What do you think about the implementation challenges that impede the access to CAR T, and how did you look at things from a perspective of a drug plan manager and the need for, you know, concerted approaches across the country to address this issue?
Yeah, you're right, Marcel. I did have direct involvement in the rollout of CAR T in Alberta, and also on the interprovincial committee for the sort of national rollout. And you know, looking back at the timeline you had brought up earlier, I think sort of what we learned through CAR T, at least in its initial phases, is when that new therapy came in, many patients around the country did qualify for the treatment. They met those indications, their clinicians recommended them, but there was just this lack of infrastructure on the government side to respond to that. And of course, we've already heard in your presentation, as you identified, the challenges with responding to CAR T, the handling of the therapeutic and the specialty training and all of that. But I'd really say probably the most significant implementation issue from my observation was the interprovincial coordination to roll out that therapy in key locations at scale, and then really managing those administrative issues. And this is because that demand outstripped the capacity, and provinces were frankly really challenged to respond to managing this patients across jurisdictions. And you know, add to this obvious political pressures from our masters saying what's going on around here, and patients saying, shouldn't I have access now? And you know, manufacturers saying, I thought we had a listing agreement, why isn't my drug being utilized? So I'd say that sort of in that first question you asked about the significant challenges, I'd really just focus on, you know, that implementation across boundaries, across provinces was probably the key challenge we struggled with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. So when you think about, you know, the system's readiness to introduce these types of therapies and the variation of capacity across the country, how do you see that? I think you've already mentioned some of those impacts on patients. Can you say more about what that impact looks like? You know, if you're a patient in one part or another of the country, how does that lack of readiness and variation across the country affect people?
Well, geography has a lot to play because not every center is able or will be able of providing CAR T therapies. So when a patient needs to leave home and go for treatment, they have to think about, their job, taking time off from their job if they're working, or taking, time off from their activities. They've got to sort of make sure that somebody's able to look after their house, look after their pets, their grandchildren, or their children while they are away. They have to be able to have their loved one caregiver who's looking after them in the hospital stay close to the hospital, and also be very much aware of anything that needs to they could come up with the patient because of some of the side effects associated with the CAR T. And we see that there are many new protocols that are being developed, and not all cancer centers have that experience, because we talked about the system readiness from the ability of providing the drug, which is where I focus, but there's also the post therapy, the post treatment system readiness, which is critical in managing some of the side effects, the CRS, the cytokine release syndrome, and also the ICANS, or some of the neurological toxicities that we see with CAR T. And so, that requires monitoring. It requires education on the patients and the caregiver side to see what, could potentially happen, or and what to do about it. And in some instances, we're looking at sort of off the hospital, or sort of just staying close to the hospital. So what does that represent? So from the patient perspective, it's not just the system itself not being able to palliate or to address these issues, but also the family of the patients as well, and those who are being caregiving. Because if you have to stay in the hotel, there's the financial implications, and we call financial toxicities for the patients that could be very high. And those are important things that we need to think about.
Yeah, for sure. The impacts are huge. And Graham, from your perspective, how do those issues look, when you're sitting in a payer chair? You're looking at the challenges in rolling this out, and the impact on patients. Where do you kind of come out on these issues, and what payers and governments can do to address some of those barriers?
Yeah, thanks, Marcel. I think it's a good question, and I would just start by saying that government recognizes that time and uncertainty are destabilizing factors to patients and the clinicians that are trying to manage the disease, and everybody really does want, I believe, manufacturers, government, the patients, the patient community, we all want the best therapies and to have access to those therapies. And I think the impact to patients in using that CAR T example and other complex therapy is sort of that uncertainty of getting access to a drug that has been listed, because of the challenges of interprovincial billing, because of the challenge of managing patients on a national roster across boundaries, and I imagine they're with it from a patient lens, and certainly heard about this when I was a public payer. Just that discouragement when they see something being listed that's been waited for a long time, and then ultimately not coming to fruition in such a way quickly that they can access that therapy. We're talking about very sick patients, people that really need the best treatments, and so this is the piece that I think that everybody is sort of rallying around to try to say, how do we do better next time, understanding that these complex therapies are continuing to come through the system.
If I can add to Marcel to that,
sure.
if I may, There's also the issue of misinformation. We have Facebook pages at Myeloma Canada with groups, patients, and caregivers, etc. So we monitor them quite carefully and closely. And some of the information that I see on there about CAR T is it's wrong in terms of, like, people believe that because it's available in certain provinces, they've heard the news about, CAR T is now available in Alberta and BC and Quebec, and they go, oh, well, my CAR T is going to be available too. People don't understand that, no, it's not. There's different CAR Ts, and a CAR T there's CAR T for lymphomas, for leukemia, and now for myeloma. So there's an expectation that if they hear about CAR T, then it's going to be available to them. So we need to be very careful as a patient community to educate the patient to say, no, there are different CAR Ts, and we don't have ours is not funded yet, but we're working to make it happen. And they get very discouraged, because they see the clinical benefits through, on social media. I mean, somebody taking a CAR T and they're now disease free. So they get very excited. So, there's this whole underground information that can become a barrier, misinformation, and, sort of let down of patients' expectation that we need to manage.
Yeah, huge communication challenge, I suspect, for governments and for groups like yours, and we're trying to, give credible information, accurate information, and temper some of those expectations.
And Marcel, I wonder if I might just talk a little bit about process on not only CAR T, but generally, because I think government is in many ways a bit of a mystery box to people that aren't within inside of it, and it I think can be frustrating to see the time that goes by. There is deep complexity in trying to list these therapies, and I'll just use focusing on CAR T and cancer. The context here is that for about the last decade, most therapeutics that have come through have been a single molecule or biologic, and when they're approved for reimbursement to provincial formularies, they really go through a very routine process, typically, which is that sort of hospital inpatient pharmacies to inpatient clinics. Now with CAR T, patients receive that therapy in the hospital, and as we talked about, not all hospitals, not all jurisdictions have the ability to stand those things up. So it was very apparent right away the challenge of how are we going to get access to these patients. But underneath sort of that surface, the part of the iceberg that's beneath the surface, and the challenge that I mentioned earlier, is the interprovincial coordination of this. And so there's these interprovincial billing agreements that exist between jurisdictions that govern access to insured medical services, which is something entirely separate from the pharmaceutical drug program in a jurisdiction. It's an entire arm of government that's different. And so just looking at that CAR T example, again, that mystery box, what happened behind the curtain? Well, what happened was we had to quickly assemble a broad mix of jurisdictional representatives to really bear down to understand how are we going to set up the right locations to provide that access, and to really get those interprovincial agreements changed quickly. So we went to the Deputy Ministers of Health Standing Committee, which is probably the key policy committee in Canada, grapple with health issues, and got a mandate there. And then from there, really worked the Rolodex to say, okay, who are the key movers and shakers in Canada that need to get around this problem, and make those necessary operational changes to see access to the drug. In parallel, we had to have the assistant deputy ministers across the country get together, responsible for those interprovincial billing agreements, and actually task that intergovernmental committee responsible for those agreements to make those changes. And so I say all that because it might seem bureaucratic to say, well, why would we have to change these interprovincial billing agreements in order to get access to this therapy? But remember, there are hundreds of billions of dollars a year is what make the Canadian health system run, and provinces deliver health care under the Constitution. And they have to be accountable for those dollars that are spent, not only in the provincial boundaries, but also to the federal government for those transfer patients. So with a host of patients, sort of needing access across the country, had to set up that roster of patients to be a seamless approach, moving patients around, set up the systems to ensure reimbursement could take place in a timely way. And so there's this architecture that's behind the curtain that is necessary to change. Now, it did take months, but not years to roll out. And I think what really is important about these kind of discussions and this kind of project is to pause, reflect, and say, what can we do differently next time? Because further to Martine's comment, and I think it's a great one, how come we're not ready for the next? Okay, so all that pain, why are we not ready? Why does it feel like we're not ready? Now, again, there's architecture in the background turning, but at the end of the day, we do need to take time to reflect and learn through these things to be ready for that.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great segue into our next segment of questions. And just a reminder to everyone, if you do have questions, please write them into the Q&A function of the webinar. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll ask those questions to the panel after I complete a couple more rounds of questions. So, thinking about the future then, Graham, yes, we've got the formula down for CAR-T. This should be easier next time around. And so I'm going to start with Caroline. Thinking about the future, how can we better prepare health systems to implement breakthrough medicines like CAR-T? What changes or improvements would make the biggest difference to health systems and to patients? And why is our I2U helpful in that process? What do you think that will accomplish through the work that is now started?
Merci, Marcel. Oui. Why I2U is important, and I heard Graham, I heard Martine and yourself talking about complex drug, right, like CAR-T. Of course, at Novartis, as a pharmaceutical and other company, we've explored a lot how to accelerate the journey from regulatory approval to reimbursement, right? That's typical, remains a priority. So there's a lot of work that is done on that. Why I2U is important is because it doesn't mean that if a breakthrough therapy is reimbursed, that it is fully utilized. And we heard Martin saying that some patients think that because it's reimbursed, it can be utilized. So in order to really get the best out of these treatments and get the best outcome, we need to bring the discussion now to implementation, right? And it's a topic that is less research, there's less work, and I think that's why I2U is important, because the focus of the work will be after reimbursement. So I think it's super important, the work that I2U is doing. And I've seen, because we were there when it started, and I've seen already the great work that the advisory board is doing, right? Expert coming from different field, thinking of, and we're talking about CAR-T here, but thinking of CAR-T, thinking of cell and gene, thinking of different treatment, what have happened in Canada, what happened in other country, right? So thinking of that, and then meeting with current people in the system leaders. So I saw that the advisory board went talking to current system leaders. I think that's super important to pick their brain. What do they really need, really, right? How can we improve it so we get better the next time? So I think it's very, very important. And the other thing that will be great with I2U is once the research done, the feedback is gathered, what can concretely be done? What concrete tool could be proposed to system leaders? Because system leaders, as we speak after the COVID and everything's super busy. So I think it's good to have a group that dedicate time to really think about that and really bring value and improve things for the future.
Mhm. Okay, thank you for that, Caroline. And maybe I'll just ask Martin and Graham to weigh in on the same question of looking forward around to system readiness and addressing these challenges. Where do you see I2U making a difference?
Yeah, I could jump in there, sure, Marcel. And I guess, it's wonderful to answer questions like this now that I'm not directly in that system anymore, because I can be an armchair quarterback and make comments. But I do think for me, a project like this is very important because it aims to shift that dialogue from the one we're all familiar with, which you mentioned in your presentation, sort of just improving the reimbursement of drugs, to actually getting to a conversation about how to maximize the value of breakthrough drugs. And I can only speak from a government perspective. I can tell you there's a lot of very hardworking, passionate people in the health file on the government side. And they say the world runs on tired people. That's certainly true of people that work in the healthcare world. And what happens is the urgent often trumps the important. And so what this project, I think, does is it says, okay, let's take a step back from that urgent sort of firefighting piece that we all need to do. Let's have those conversations to say, how do we be ready? How do we focus on that strategic level? And I would just say, there needs to be an increased focus on what I would call intentional planning. That upstream, high-level collaborative dialogue with all the key system players that allows the complexity of the access regime and delivery protocols to be worked out early for budgets to be allocated, because that's a whole other part of this we haven't really talked about. But a lot of times these drugs or therapies become listed mid-year, and so you have to really contemplate ahead of time from a government perspective how you're going to create the headroom to fund them. And at the same time, given that there's a lot of demand and a lot of progress being made through investment in that innovation, knowing that we're probably not going to have initially in most of these therapies large patient populations, but they're going to be focused on pretty small patient populations with complex disease. How do we have that approach that says we're going to take a center of excellence approach, we're going to fund and we're going to invest, we're going to be ready in key nodes, they're going to serve those patients across provincial boundaries seamlessly? Again, because I think traditionally it's been a more routine process where you have provinces taking care of their own patients. And now we're in this world, we're stepping into this exciting world that says we have to remove these silos and we have to have patients moving across boundaries easily, the system ready to accept them, and all the machinery in place to actually be able to provide provinces that reimbursement, to service that patient, have that national rostering of which patients get served best, and really to, I think, live up to the dream of being that sort of functional national universal healthcare system. So I think that's the exciting part of the conversation for me in doing this work. Okay,
thank you, Graham. And Martin?
Great comments, Graham. I'm going to jump on those in terms of, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to break barriers. We need to relook at how systems or healthcare is even sort of measured, and not measured based on sort of the past way we used to measure things. Are you addressing your budget, or are you, getting your number of your submissions through, and number of listings, and time to, what I call now time to patients, is really important. And you alluded to this as well by speaking about the small populations of drugs that we're or patient and diseases that we're focusing on. That there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's not good for scientists and for HTA bodies and for governments. They want certainty. They want to know, well, this is going to work in this number of patients, and this is my budget, and this is how I'm going to apply it. But with the way that science is evolving, it's like, exploding right now in terms of innovation. I mean, 5 years ago, CAR T, it was basically was really tiny, small clinical trials in myeloma. And look where we are today. And you look at the case studies that we're looking at, like Leqembi, in Alzheimer's. I mean, that is, it has the potential to change the way people live. I mean, everybody has someone in their family who's suffering from either dementia or from Alzheimer's. And when we see the consequences on the healthcare system, the consequences on the family, the consequences on everyone affected by these diseases. And so if we can sort of bring new innovations that are maybe more complicated in terms of adaptability and how they're addressed in the community, then we are going to be, way ahead in terms of providing to society the care that they need. And I agree with you. Everybody has their hearts into this, and everybody wants to do best for patients, for society. I mean, I've not met anyone with bad intent or not wanting to do the right thing. We are working, with limited resources in the patient community and even in industry and government. And we would like to do more. But I think now's the time to sit down together, to collaborate, and to work on solutions and learn from each other, so that, when new innovative approaches come to market and are developed, we understand how to implement them. And even, collaborating between manufacturers. I mean, you can have a CAR T manufacturer that has a lot of experience in the manufacturing process, collaborate with another disease area and manufacture, within or another company and manufacture different CAR Ts, because you have the center of excellence and expertise. So we have to look at things very differently in a world of uncertainty that is moving very quickly. And in terms of innovation, the other day I heard somebody talk about, we're going to start using artificial data. I mean, how are you going to apply that to the world that we live in now, and in the context of, regulatory, HTA, PCPA? I mean, we're going to have to start thinking about it, because it's coming, and it's coming faster than we think.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Change is a constant, and we need to move to very responsive and agile health systems.
And sorry, I just really quickly, the other reason, what excites me too, is that what we're doing here with these 3 sort of case studies is building sort of a toolkit, something that we can use to address, other compounds that or drugs, treatments, innovation that can come to fruition in terms of research in the future. So to me, that's the concrete aspect. To say we need to change the system, we need to work more collaboratively, we all know this, but we need tools, like how we, for the next, sort of innovation, how are we going to apply what we learn and what we've identified as key elements to, so maybe it's just a checkbox and what we put through, new innovation to understand, well, whatever question needs to be addressed at what point and by whom, and do we already have the expertise? And if we do, let's go and get it. And so that we don't reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of reinventing the wheel, I think we'll now go to some questions that we've received in the chat. And I'll just put the first one to the panel, and whichever, or all 3 of you, if you want to answer, that's fine. So the question really is around, does Canada need to invent its own approach here to CAR T? Like these are novel therapies. Every other country in the world needs to figure this out, figure out the infrastructure, adapt their systems. Can we avoid Canada not having to create another made in Canada approach and instead just shamelessly steal from what other countries are doing. Who wants to tackle that one first?
Well, I can try and say a few words about that. I mean, I think in principle, I agree. Yes. I mean, wherever in this world that Martine is describing of embracing ambiguity, for lack of a better term, in order to respond to that ambiguity, we want to learn from others. And we want to be a continuous learning and a continuous improvement program. I do see green shoots of development in terms of those high-level international relationships between the HTA body, with the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, the regulator. So they're having dialogue, I think, in ways that probably surpass the past in getting to the learnings, particularly in those jurisdictions where these things have been launched first. You know, a lot of times things, for example, happen in the US, they'll stand up those clinical trials. And so by the time things come to Canada for those manufacturers coming to have that listing approval, there may be clinical trials and learnings that have already been taking place in a place like the United States. So building those synapses, I guess, to have the dialogue across internationally. All that being said, Canada is a unique system. It's beautiful in its diversity in having these different provincial entities delivering healthcare under the Constitution. And we do have to recognize and respect the architecture we're working within. But I think what we would try to do is, wherever possible, and learn from other jurisdictions that in the ways that we can apply those learnings to a Canadian context. And then where we truly do have things that don't line up with those other jurisdictions, you know, having that upstream planning in order to remedy those things and in order to be ready. So it's a good question. Thanks to whoever shared that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I'll add to that there's room for many types of CAR T, because CAR T is you know, in myeloma, focuses on the BCMA. I'm not going to get technical or medical here, but you know, it's the immune system, and a cancer cell has a very complex immune system and lots of different markers. And CAR T, you focus on one of them. But there are many other targets that you can use and you can target. And I know in lymphomas and leukemia, it's a different target than it is in myeloma. And there's a lot of what we call homegrown development of CAR Ts that look at, you know, attacking the immune system of the cancer cell by, you know, sort of connecting with different targets. And so there are 4 right now in multiple myeloma that are being developed for CAR T or NKA CARs, or TAC is another type of CAR T. And they all have their place, because if you can attack the myeloma cell from different, you know, sort of aspects or different sort of sides, then, you know, obviously, you know, you can lead to better outcomes, better survival, etc. So there's room for these Canadian developments, and there's 4 currently in multiple myeloma. We're very good here in Canada for developing the basic science, like the labs. One doctor said to me, we're very good at treating mice, and finding these really good sort of potential treatments that could be developed and upscaled. The problem we have here is the ability to upscale these treatments and do the phase 2 clinical trials. You know, researchers are competing for grant money through CIHR, and you know, it costs $2 and $3 million, and sometimes $4, which is not a lot of money when you think about how much a clinical trial does cost. So why can't we develop these CAR Ts? And that's something that, you know, we are looking at experience from Spain, who have developed their own CAR Ts. Why can't we do this here in Canada? And I think that, you know, there's many players that need to come to the table. There's governments, because they have a vested interest in investing in Canadian grown innovation. There's, private payers as well, and philanthropy. I mean, the role of patient organizations, and that can support this kinds of research, and also the federal government as well through a lot of innovative funds and development, industry, sort of different players that, I want to bring to the table so we can look at this as a solution. I'm not saying that, commercial CAR-Ts will have no room. What I'm saying is that there's room for more and different CAR-Ts. And if we have the expertise here, let's invest.
Yeah, and Marcel, and I think for CAR-T and for other technology, it's super important to look at what's happening elsewhere. And the advisory board is doing it, and manufacturer too, of course, right? When we have a new technology, a new innovation, it's our role also to rapidly inform the system in order for the system to be ready, right? So we communicate rapidly with the system what we're coming for, so the system is ready, right? We embed system readiness in everything that we do. We look at what's happening in other countries, because as an international manufacturer, we have sight on what's happening elsewhere. But it's important, and that's a lesson learned from the CAR-T and other technology. It's important to understand that it's complex, and a wall-to-wall, a one-size-fits-all doesn't work. Even in Canada is big, right? We even need in our own country to approach it differently from a province to a province. And to what we were saying earlier, also it raises questions like ethic and equity. These complex technology won't be implemented in small hospital, in small provinces. So we need to keep that in mind. It's super important. So what's done elsewhere? Yes. Understanding that our country is unique, that our provinces are unique, but it's certainly a topic that is very important, and I2U is doing a great job and is really bringing value to the system. And to Martin's point, coming with concrete tool will be super helpful, and we're very happy to be part of that.
Okay, thank you. So time is marching. We only have a few more minutes, and we've had a few questions in addition in the chat. I'm going to try and couple a question together here, and maybe just ask you for very quick snappers. So one is around getting feedback on challenges from a provincial level, and do we intend as a group to bring the provinces together to find solutions here? Do we have any signals that there's an appetite for these kinds of pan-Canadian discussions? And related to that is kind of the blood products and plasma products dimension. And are we engaging, or do we know of engagements that are happening with CBS and Emma Quebec formularies? So can I just ask each of you to comment on one or the other of those questions if you have anything to offer? Graham?
Well, I'll jump in, I guess, first, and you said quick snap. So I'll just say, being on the board for I2U, we've had a lot of really good initial conversations already with CADITH, with the regulator, with Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, and key health system leaders to even instruct at an early stage our prospectus of what should this focus on. So I think that first question, yeah, they seem very receptive and looking forward to the results. On the second question, there's a lot to unpack there. I won't try and do it quickly, other than to say we do need to acknowledge that the reimbursement considerations for blood drugs move through a separate, rather distinct pathway in most jurisdictions than sort of a lot of the other things that move through therapeutics and the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance and marching through that. So I can't get into that today, but I think there needs to be learnings on both sides of it.
Okay. I think that we have come up against our endpoint in the conversation. And it's been interesting. It's gone by very quickly. Great questions. I wish we had time to go through all of them. First, I want to thank our panelists for a great job. Thank you for making some time available to chat about this really important issue. I want to thank everyone who made some time to join the discussion today. A reminder that you will get a copy of the slides and a link to the video of the panel discussion for future reference. You'll get a survey after the discussion as well that you can fill out. Please do. And in a nutshell, that is about it. I want to again thank the Santis team for pulling this together. Fearless leader Ross Wallace, Rosa Staltieri, and Preeti Somani. And one last note, we'll try and get back to those of you who posed questions that we didn't have time to answer. We'll try and get back to you with some answers from this group. So thank you again. Have a great afternoon. Merci. À la prochaine.